Right now, I'm in Custer, Hartford Beach, Good Earth State Park, and in one week, I visited every single state park in South Dakota. All 13 of them. In my ongoing quest to visit every state park in the US, I made my way to South Dakota. While it's one of the prairie states and known for vast expanses of grasslands, I was hoping to find more than that, even outside of its one major exception to the grasslands. Hopefully you're intrigued too. This is Goshen Man, the South Dakota State Parks. Before getting started, I should mention I only visited state parks. Nothing else in the state park system like state recreation areas. I should also mention I visited all the parks in South Dakota just after visiting all the parks in North Dakota. This isn't super important to the video, you can watch it independently, but it will contextualize a couple of things I say, and that I've been on the prairie for about 5 days to begin with. Let's get started. The first park I saw in South Dakota was Seecha Hollow. The name comes from a Dakota word meaning bad or evil. We're starting out in the northeastern corner of the state with this park located in a section of forested hills. It stands in stark contrast to the surrounding prairie around it. You can see here since it's early spring that the trees are just starting to bud. Like, could you imagine if I got here before the trees got their leaves? That'd be really tragic. This park has lots of trails where you can hike through the forest, and there are many streams running through the park. There are also a few campsites here, and I was the only person staying the night. You ever been in like a campsite before by yourself? It's kind of eerie. Also, to save time here, I'll say every state park in South Dakota is camping, except for one, and I'll bring it up when we get there. You can also see the namesake Seecha Hollow here, which is a pretty neat little spot. You can see like all the yellow flowers in bloom, just a nice little pleasant area. Also, Sasquatch is here, in this tiny patch of forest. There's also some trails in the prairie circling the forest, but I'd rather not. Yeah, forest, pretty nice little spot. I'm sure you're thinking that driving through the prairie sounds exhausting, but honestly it's not too bad. You just gotta get used to it, and the parks are pretty close to each other anyways. The order I'll be going in will be vaguely north to south and then crossing east to west. Roy Lake was quite close to Seecha Hollow, and it's a lake. There's not much to say about it. You can do lake stuff here, like boating, camping, fishing, and there's a beach. Also, so many bugs. None of them were mosquitoes though, I think, which is weird. Not much that stands out until I saw this island tucked away behind the campgrounds. It was a neat little area with lots of wildlife, lots of birds, but also this thrashing sound in the water, which I was wondering what it could be. Could it be a beaver or a muskrat or maybe even a turtle? That'd be crazy. No, it's a big old carp, just stuck in the reeds, so not the most interesting thing. Honestly, pretty standard lake, but access to this little island does make it stand out a little bit. There's a second part of the park that I didn't go to. It had some more camping, but yeah, I feel like I wasn't missing much. Also, I took a shower here, and I think I was the first person to use it since October. I've swam in glacial lakes before, and this was colder. Another short drive to the next park. Remember what I said earlier about only visiting state parks and not other places in the system? Well, here's where it gets funky. Since Fort Sisseton is described as a historic state park, or a state historic park, or simply a state park. Either way, I decided to include it since it had state park in the title, and it seemed to be the only historic state park anyway. Will this precedent continue to future states? We shall see. But for now, Fort Sisseton State Park, which is essentially a museum made out of multiple buildings. When I entered the main building with the primary museum, it felt like I had entered the afterlife. The ringing sound permeated the chamber, and the dull yellow and wheelchair made it feel like I was in some kind of surreal depiction of the afterlife. It didn't help that when I entered the next room, the person behind the front desk was a child, maybe about 12 years old. She gave me a map and explained what buildings were off limits, then went to the first room I had entered and the ringing stopped. So I guess entering that way sets off some kind of alarm, and I was there thinking, oh yeah, this is normal. This room just makes that noise. Now, if you think I'm the weird one for entering that way, why would you put a sign on the door that says, "Welcome to Fort Sisseton. Here are the hours on the museum. Please come on in." I later saw 2 kids open the door, then immediately bolt outside, since I'm pretty sure they thought they did something wrong. Like, just put a sign that says, "Please use other door." Anyways, that building was the main entrance and had a lot of information about what it's like to live in a fort on the prairie. It does not seem fun. You could have guessed that, though. The surreal entrance I had was probably the most interesting thing that happened. The rest of it is a pretty standard historical site. As I said earlier, some of the buildings you can enter, walk around, look at old stuff. Like this jail where kids can lock their friends up for a laugh and hit each other with fake wooden guns. Many were closed or under renovations, and there's also a school tour on the premises, so there was stuff I didn't go into so as to not intrude. Like the schoolhouse where they kept the school kids' stuff. It would feel strange to wander into the room where all the kids stored their backpacks, he thought, as he filmed said room. Kind of a neat fort if you're into forts. There was also this lookout tower that you could go in. Pretty sure it was allowed to be entered. This feels like the weirdest park to have camping, maybe it's just me. This park also has a lake included. At least I'm pretty sure it's part of the park. It had like the fee entrance station, so had a boat launch, looks like a standard prairie lake. Other than that, it's a fort. It's one of those Manifest Destiny type forts. Yep. The next park also has a story to go with it. As I approached this park, I saw that part of Highway 212 would be closed off, and I hope that didn't include the part I needed to get into the park. So I took the long detour, which took me surprisingly far south, and through this random county road on around to the other side of the park. I thought, okay, I'm gonna get some lunch at a place that has a salad bar and a bank vault, then come up with a plan. The salad bar wasn't even open and it was mid. I was worried I would have to return to this park, creating a huge detour on a future trip. So I decided to try and sneak around the construction by going here. This plan was completely unnecessary as the road wasn't truly closed off until after the state park. They had just had the detour further up the road. So after all those shenanigans, I had finally reached Fisher Grove State Park and has camping in this loop, and that's it. Trying to get here was more interesting than the park itself. Apparently it has a trail and more camping on the other side of the river, or at least it did. The bridge is just gone. Doesn't really seem like a temporary fix, and even if it is, I don't feel like I'm missing out on much. I've been so frustrated if the construction blocked off this park and I had to come back for it. Glad to move on from that one though. Heading back east to Hartford Beach. This park is located on Big Stone Lake on the border with Minnesota and is a source of the Minnesota River. This park has hills which slope down towards the lake and a few access spots on the lake with all your favorite lake activities like looking at fish and all the other stuff like boating at a beach and swimming and yay. This spot you had to hike to, but it was a neat wetlands area. There are several trails through the forest along the lakeside, and campsites are spread throughout. There's also some burial mounds, I'm pretty sure that's what these are, but I'm not entirely sure. Nearby you can get some views of the lake, and it's pretty neat. This trail said that there was a cabin at the edge of the park, so, you know, decided to take a nice little lakeside stroll through the forest. But when I got to the spot, it was just the site of an old cabin. It wasn't even there, it was just like, cabin site. I'm like, why? Okay, false advertising. So when I finished the loop, I didn't expect that the trading post that was also mentioned to actually be there, but there it was. It's an old building, but still neat. I guess the way I feel about this park is, it's neat. Nice views of the lake, nice forested trails. Pretty simple, but pretty nice. The next park is Oakwood Lakes. Instead of just one lake, there's several at this park. It's got exactly what you'd expect from a lake park. Somewhere to use boats, trails through the wetlands, beaches, and other day use, horse support, large stone towers. The fact that it's towers plural. Also, a lot of state parks have disc golf. I've probably forgotten to mention a couple of them. There's also Old Sport Mortimer's Cabin, as well as several burial mounds. A couple of mild hills that you can get a little bit higher of a vantage point on. The trail I did in full was a peninsula sticking out into the lake, and it was a pleasant little time. Some state parks just feel like state parks, and this is for sure one of those. Here's a fun fact though, the main lake this park is situated around is not Lake Oakwood. That's this one over here. This one is Lake Tatankaha, or Johnson Lake. There's two different names though, even though it seems like it's one continuous lake. I don't know, a lot of little stuff, neat little spot. Would you believe that the next park is a lake? Yep, it's time for Herman Lake State Park. Just outside the town of Masson, this park is on the shore of the lake with the same name. What they don't tell you about though is the secret smaller lake at the center of the park, Herman Pond. Okay, it's a pond, whatever. You can get on top of this hill, get a nice view of the whole area. There's also some day use and hiking on the shores of the lakes and ponds, beaches, and places for boats. I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot here. There's also some trails in the prairie and wetlands, and that's how these parks go. This park was undergoing construction, so I guess that's unique, kind of, not really. Speaking of construction, it's every road in South Dakota. The next park is Palisades, which might have the most underwhelming entrance to a park yet. Well, second most. I was looking for, what's the word? Oh yeah, Palisades. It takes a few minutes, but eventually I found the trailhead to see the Palisades. Now that's a Palisades. For those unaware, Palisades are steep cliffs along a riverside, which we can see here. While the lake parks are nice, they do start to blend together, so it was nice to see something that was a bit of a change of pace. The red rock is quite striking among the forest and river. The stone is known as Sioux Quartzite and can be found all around the convergence of South Dakota, Minnesota, and Iowa. Many roads in the area have a red tint and several buildings were constructed with it. Back to the park, these formations stretch all along the river in the park, which is aptly named Split Rock Creek. Although I think it's beyond creek status, come on. It is possible to cross this bridge over the river, and on the other side there's some trails and picnic areas. It's the Palisades at a different view. You can climb up them and get a little bit of a higher view. I also thought I might have seen some marmots here, which seems unlikely, but I don't know what other short, chunky mammal with an affinity for rocks it could be, so... Now there are a few official trails along the Palisades, and some unofficial. This one here I was not feeling up to since, I'd have to get back up. Thankfully there's a much simpler method, like 10 steps to the right, and there's a trail down to access the river. There's also some that just pass through the forest on top of the cliffs and overlook the prairie. There's also a couple of lookouts if you're short on time or energy. Definitely the coolest park in South Dakota I'd stopped at yet, and now I'm gonna continue to yap but about nothing in particular, just like, check out these Palisades, man. This was kind of the first park in South Dakota. It's like, oh yeah, that's why I enjoy doing these state park trips. This is the purpose, to find places like this that you don't know about. On the drive to the next park, I passed through Iowa. Hold on. I was not expecting to visit Iowa on this trip, but I decided to make an impromptu stop at the South Dakota-Iowa-Minnesota Tri-Point. It does exist. Alright, back to South Dakota. The next state park is Good Earth, just to the south of Sioux Falls. The entrance is pretty underwhelming, but as we learned earlier, looks can be deceiving. They can be, they don't have to be. However, this park did have the largest visitor center I've seen for a state park yet. It was mostly empty, but still. This park is located in the Blood Run Historical Site, which spans across the South Dakota-Iowa border, and is an archaeological site studying the Oneota culture. The Good Earth name comes from the Omaha, Ponca, Iowa, and other tribes referring to the peace established here, or the quality of the mineral-rich soil. The area was populated for over 8,000 years, and this is what most of the visitor center was dedicated to. Why do so many dog statues have lifeless eyes with a 1,000-yard stare? There are also some animals in the center. Allow me to read off their names. These turtles are Bonnie and Clyde, Tortellini, not a tortoise, a box turtle, Orion the salamander, and Rutherford B. Hayes, named after everyone's 31st favorite US president. Quite the variety of names there. Let's get into the actual park. Good Earth has a lot of trails, and that's the vibe. This is South Dakota's newest state park, and also the only one without camping. A bit of deja vu there, weird. There's a couple of lookout points here where you can overlook the Big Sioux River and over into Iowa. So that's kind of neat. Lots of trails through the forest you can hike down along some of them and then get right up next to the river. I don't have a lot to say about this one. There's a lot of hiking, a lot of them go through the forest, nice pleasant trails. Many trails extend into the prairie, but when it comes to hiking through the prairie, I'd rather not. Continuing to move south until I reach Newton Hills, which when I arrived seemed to be lacking something. What's the word? Oh yeah, hills. Turns out we were just on top of the hills. There are a couple of other entrances too, one for horses I believe, and a scout camp. I passed by the campgrounds and checked out this overlook, and boy does it overlook. There's also a lot of little day use areas scattered around. There's also this one-way road that descends into the valley and has many access points for trails, and was overall a very pleasant drive. There's quite a few different trails you can hike on back here, which snake across the hills. Then the road ends up near a lookout tower, which seemed quite promising. However, it doesn't quite look over the tree line, so it's not quite as exciting as I thought it would be, but it's still something. There's some parks like I feel I miss out on unique scenery by not seeing all the trails. This is not one of those cases. Like, it's a very nice forest, don't get me wrong, but the whole place has a very similar vibe. All the trails are just kind of like hiking through the hills and the forests, or maybe it's kind of flat and you're hiking through the forest. It's like, yep. I have seen the forest. But if you like the forest, and you like hills, Newton Hills.
The next park is Union Grove, located in the southeastern corner of the state.
This taught me a lesson how much of this I can do in a day. This was my 6th state park I had visited in one day, and it was definitely wearing on me. When I say 1 week in the intro, it was technically 4 days. But that doesn't sound as catchy. This is another park located in a forested section of South Dakota. It's got some hills, some trails, and some trails for horses. It's got more pine trees than what we've seen so far though, so yippee. There's this one hill that was a little bit of a lookout point, but other than that, nothing too standout about this park. Maybe there's a hidden gem deep in this park's forest, but I have a feeling that this is the gist of it. It's a lot of forest, man. Like, all the forest parks stand out from the prairie, but they don't stand out from each other too much. But thankfully I could call it there, and I was gonna sleep in a bed for the first time in a week. To get to the last 2 parks, I had to drive across basically the entirety of the state. Thankfully, you don't have to sit through all that, but I would like to offer you a taste. Now I've been driving on the prairie for over a week now, so this was light work. Prairie madness ain't got nothing on me. I also visited Pierre, since I had never been before, and it does have one of the most, yep, that's the Capitol building, type Capitol buildings I've ever seen. There were still hours of driving after this, but I had become one with the prairie. It does make sense most of the parks are on the eastern side of the state, but the fact that there's none in the middle is kinda crazy. I guess there's a lot of recreation sites though, so there's that. After a long drive, I could see the next state park in the distance, Bear Butte State Park. I'd assumed this was the park when I was driving, so thankfully it actually was. Or all of this video would have been for nothing. When approaching it, I realized that to get to the top, it would be a bit of a hike, not just a stroll through the forest, which did excite me. When doing some preliminary research, I knew you could climb to the top, but I had no idea how tall it would be, and a bit higher than I was expecting. After entering the park on the drive up, I saw some bison. When I arrived, I first made a stop at the visitor center, and they didn't want the artifacts to be filmed. This is just a touching rocks table, though. That's fine. There's also some nice views just from the parking lot and visitor center. Now, this park was lacking something key to the name. What's it? Oh yeah, bears. But nah, I didn't see any bears here. Sorry to get your hopes up. However, apparently there are rattlesnakes that won't rattle? Oh, okay. I got started with the ascent at about 4 p.m., which is the best time to start a hike, right? Thankfully, many portions of the trail were covered in shadow due to the position of the sun. If you hike this trail, you'll see colorful pieces of fabric tied around trees. These represent prayers that people have left behind. There were requests not to photograph them, so they are not shown here. To the indigenous people of the area, this place is sacred and may make the pilgrimage here to leave offerings, pray, and meditate. By the Lakota, it's known as Mato Paha, meaning Bear Mountain, and to the Cheyenne it's known as Noa Havose, meaning Giving Hill. Now, Bear Butte is actually a similar type of structure to Devil's Tower known as a laccolith. It's an intrusive piece of igneous rock pushing through to the surface and technically not a true butte. So it's 2 for 2 strikes on the name. You can see along the trail these massive impressive ridges, and it's overall a very scenic height. Although if you're not the biggest fan of heights, just off to the side of the trail in a few places, it just kind of plummets down. I'm like weirdly fine with heights as long as I have like solid ground to stand on. I'm not a big fan of climbing though. After a decently long hike, many switchbacks and loose rock trails, I finally reached the top. And the views up here are incredible. While views of entire mountain ranges are amazing, there's something to be said about gazing into the distance, and in some directions, it just being completely flat. Now, there was a bit of haze when I went, so imagine how far you could see on like a really clear day. Getting a nice view like this after a hike definitely feels more rewarding than just like driving up. It's still cool, but there's like a little bit of a sense of accomplishment, even if the hike itself wasn't too crazy. It's just a nice place to sit for a little bit. Overall, I'd say the hike was made medium difficulty. It's not super steep, and it's not that long either, but it is a constant incline, so there's that. But of course, you're going to want to bring a lot of water, but you know, that's just like standard hiking stuff, and sunscreen if you burn easily. Because I lucked out that the time of day was casting shadows on me, but midday, I feel like I would be burned to a crisp. Plus, it was nice for a trail to start at the bottom of an incline. Most trails on this trip, I had to hike downhill first and uphill on the way back, which is not as fun. This lake is also part of the park, and on its own, it's a very lackluster lake, but it does have a nice view of the butte, so it's got that going for it. Oh yeah, there's some campsites on the lake too. To get to the next and final park though, I'd be heading south into the Black Hills. Now we have finally arrived at the one you've all been waiting for. Even if you've never heard of it, you've been waiting for it. Custer State Park. This might be one of the most well-known state parks in the country, and for good reason. The sheer size of it makes it feel like it's on national park level, and it's got scenery to match. I put an entire day in the schedule to check out this park, and I feel like I saw it a lot, but also wasn't even close to seeing it all. The campground I stayed at was Bluebell, one of the many campsites in the park. When I got started that day, I figured I would go south and loop around the park vaguely counterclockwise. I started out with the Wildlife Loop Road and immediately saw some wildlife. A couple of big old bison. It's nice getting started early since there's pretty much nobody else on this road. Took a turn on this random dirt road that said it was open to the public, and that was good enough for me. I had no idea where it would turn up, but I was in an adventurous mood. Turns out it ends at the main highway, but I did see some bighorn sheep this way. Not technically on Wildlife Loop Road, but still, pretty cool. And I'm back where I started. The bison have moved though. I eventually got back to where I was and keep going, then turn off on one of the next side roads I saw. If you're doubting this could be a national park, it borders one, so the scenery is at least as good as Wind Cave. After driving around the wildlife loop some more and seeing some prairie dogs, I arrived at the Bison Center, which is a visitor center dedicated to learning all about bison. You can play rock, paper, scissors with different names. There are some trails around the Bison Center, but they're a small loop. It doesn't even go to the top of this hill. Not to be rude, but like, what's the point? Oh well, little bit of a view here. A short drive away is the Wildlife Center. It was closed. Time for another offshoot dirt road. Driving on roads with curves again feels right. I turned my engine off to observe this bison herd off the side of the road. Now, bison are a creature I've seen plenty of in my lifetime, but sometimes I pretend like I haven't, and it's my first time, and that makes the experience a lot more enjoyable. You can see some young ones here that still have their baby cinnamon coats. One of them was curious and it started to approach me, and I wanted to see how close it would get before scampering off, but Bob said no. One of the older bison just came and snorted at it, and then it scampered away, and I was like, oh. So I went to the end of this road, swung back, and oh, the baby's allowed to check out that car? Okay. I continued to drive down these dirt roads until I reached a horse camp, then turned around, and got back on the main road, and stopped for a couple more viewpoints. Then I got to the main visitor center, which also had a lot of information about bison, and made one of the visitor centers feel redundant. There's so much to see in this park. There's this lodge, there's this playhouse that wasn't open, but thought I'd mention it. First state park I've seen with a playhouse. The next major stop I made was at Center Lake. There's a lot of places here that would be solid state parks on their own, but then the fact that they're all part of Custer, I mean, it's just, you know, it's crazy. There's a trail here around the lake that's probably not official in hindsight. You can get over to this dam, and there's a couple of trails down to the bottom. Nice little view of these falls here. There's also a nearby lookout which had a trail pretty much straight up with no switchbacks. I would say though that the view is worth it. Even though there's telephone wires in the way. Don't worry about that. The next part of the park I checked out was the Needles Highway, which had a lot of twists and turns, and I was having the time of my life. After a bit, I came across the first of a few one-lane tunnels I would encounter. I was tempted to film driving through, but even I have my limits on so I opted with the obviously safer, standing in the middle of the road to get a picture. This is one of the best drives I've done in a state park. Actually, yeah, it's just the best. Driving through winding mountain roads was such a treat after a week and a half on the prairie and just mostly straight roads at a 90-degree angle sometimes. It felt like for a while. I get my first glimpse of the cathedral spires, and apparently those inspired Gutzon Borglum to make Mount Rushmore. Which is such a crazy first instinct to see that and be like, yeah, it's nice, but would it be better if there was a face on it? He wasn't even planning the presidents, he just wanted a face. I stopped at a couple more amazing scenic overlooks. We're just gonna take a little pause at each one. Yeah. Then I reached the end, or the start of the Needles Highway, Sylvan Lake. Basically every other place I camped at on this trip was nearly empty, which makes sense since, you know, I was there before season and it was weekdays, but Custer was almost fully booked, all of its campsites. Yeah, it's easy to see why. Sylvan Lake might be the coolest spot to stop in the park, although there's some tough competition. But these rock formations on the lake are just so cool. There's also a trail nearby to get to Black Elk Peak, which is the highest point in South Dakota, but the peak's not in the park, and I unfortunately didn't have time, so I just didn't go for it. I also saw some goslings here, too. Look at them. There are also some marmots on the rocks, and I overheard one guy say, "Whoa, look at that, it's like some kind of beaver crawling up from the water." Like, most people don't know what marmots are, but I feel like you've seen beavers before. Like, what kind of beaver is this? I guess they're both rodents, but it bugged me. But I'm not about to yell at this guy, actually it's a yellow belly marmot. On the way back down, I was able to get some shots of this tunnel, which on the way up, I had entered at the same time as someone else. Then I did one last hike for the day on the earlier mentioned Cathedral Spires Trail. The trail takes you right up next to the rock formations. You get to sneak between them and see them up close. I feel like the prettier the nature, the less I have to say about it. Like, it just speaks for itself. Look at it. This was a nice hike. It ended at a viewpoint, and I don't think I mentioned how nice the weather was since I was used to just a hot prairie. Sure, there's a little bit of a storm, but I think there was a span where I didn't see clouds for 3 days. Like, it was a little bit cool in the Black Hills, but it made a huge difference. Isn't this thrilling content? Voiceover of rocks as I talk about weather. They are nice rocks, though. I almost forgot I drove past this hole in the wall earlier, but didn't stop. Kind of a neat little turn-off area. Also, the one part I saw snow on the entire trip. I guess I saw some in the mountains when I left Montana, that where it doesn't count. The last place I made a stop at was the Mount Coolidge Lookout Tower to see the sunset. I had passed by the road earlier but hadn't gone up, and sunset seemed like the best time to visit. And yeah, there's a lookout tower. It's maybe the best view I've seen all trip. And yeah, just kind of sat here for a minute. I was kind of surprised there was only like a couple other people up here. And you know what? I think I'm going to take the advice of this sign here. I mean, I was silent for a minute while I was there, but you can just pause the video if you want to experience that. I'm not adding a minute of silence to this video. I know there's more to see within Custer State Park, but this just felt like such a fitting place to end the day. I like that there's more out there for me to explore within the park that can be left for another day. Just felt like such a fitting conclusion to an almost 2-week-long trip, and I can't imagine ending it on any other park. That being said, we still gotta get into the ranking. When ranking state parks, I sort them in order, but then I also put them into tiers, and those tiers are comparable across different states that I've visited state parks in, so you can kind of get the gist of how I think about them in the grand scheme. I'm gonna start out with F tier, which is the bottom tier. In 13th place is Fisher Grove State Park. This is the worst. There's nothing here. I mean, there is camping, but who would want to camp here? I was thinking maybe this gets a D, but I was like, no, it deserves to be 2 places below C, so it gets an F. Moving on to C tier, we're going to skip D tier because I don't think there's any in that. I think a lot of state parks in South Dakota fall into this category because they do have a lot of amenities, but the scenery is just kind of lacking, I would say. So in 12th place is Roy Lake. It gets bumped up from D tier by having this little island, but other than that, In 11th is Lake Herman. It's a lake. Got lake stuff. In 10th is Union Grove. It's a forest. It's got forest stuff. 9th is Fort Sisseton. It's a fort. It's got fort stuff and a lake. But the lake, again, isn't that interesting, so... Since so many state parks have lakes, it doesn't affect standings in the tier list since, like, you know, there's so many lakes out there, so, like, why should I go to this one specifically? In 8th is Good Earth. It's got a lot of trails, got a nice visitor center. Alright, scenery. In 7th is Oakwood Lakes. It's got a lot of nice state park stuff, but, you know, the scenery is just Plains Lake. In 6th place is Seacha Hollow. Yes, it's a forest, but, like, I don't know, the streams running through it kind of makes it have a cooler vibe than a lot of the others, and the Seacha Hollow itself. Alright, now moving on to B tier. B tier parks, I'd say, are good, but not great. Yeah, they've got a little something that gives them above C tier. In 5th is Newton Hills. Again, it's another forest, but, you know, a bit more varied in the terrain, has a couple more lookout points, and the lookout tower, well, it's a little underwhelming. I do think it adds something unique. In 4th place is Hartford Beach. I'd say, you know, it has all the standard lake stuff, but I'd say the scenery here is a little bit nicer, a bit bigger of a lake. The lookouts are a little bit nicer, and the trails are still cool. And now we move on to A tier. In 3rd place is Palisades, which I can say is kind of a hidden gem. Like, these rock formations, the Palisades, were just like a super cool little area, you know? I haven't seen much else like it. Now, there's one last tier above A tier, and that is S tier. In 2nd place is Bear Butte State Park. I think one good trail is better than, like, a whole network throughout just, like, a generic forest. Like, the views on top, once again, I'll say it, are incredible. You know, it does have this lake, which isn't the best lake in the world. Thankfully, when considering multiple parts of a park, it's additive and not, averaging. In 1st place, it's Custer State Park. You know why. You saw why. I don't have to explain it. I think it might be my new favorite state park I've been to, knocking out Cape Disappointment, Washington. Now, some of you might hear that and think, wait, you haven't done a Washington video. Are you working on a Washington video? And no, I just happened to visit Cape Disappointment and thought it was really cool. Like, Bear Butte is comparable to parks I've given S tier to in the past, but then Custer's like on a whole other level. I was considering making a separate tier for Custer, but no, I think it belongs in S tier. S tier is like the Hall of Fame, but even within a Hall of Fame, you still have people that stand out way above the others, you know? I was hoping to find some hidden gems in South Dakota, and I did. Even beyond Custer, which I wouldn't consider that hidden. As much as I rag on some state parks, I do really enjoy doing these trips and think they're a fun way to explore states, even if the state is South Dakota. I also want to continue visiting state parks. I do plan on trying to visit all the state parks in the US. It'll take years, so like and subscribe if you want to see more states. Follow the other social medias in the description. As for now, I've done this a couple times. As mentioned at the start, I visit all the parks in North Dakota, but also a couple other states. In the future, I'd love to get guests from each state, but I don't know anyone in Dakota, so yeah. The next state park trip probably won't happen this year, but stay tuned next year as I tackle the only state I haven't done that borders Montana, Idaho. Thanks for watching. This has been Goshen Man, the South Dakota State Parks.